Christianity has transformed the world. Many would agree with that simple statement, even today, but not everyone would say it has transformed it for the better. For them, Christianity is not just outdated, but a pernicious evil to be suppressed. Science, not religion, is the solution to all our problems. Human reason and achievement has eclipsed religion, triumphed over the cross. Human rights, freedom, prosperity, they're all the legacy of secular humanism. Or so they like to think. But the historic reality, of course, is vastly different. Luther, Calvin, Wilberforce, Shaftesbury, Butler, these are names familiar to pretty much everyone. But what about Griffith John, or Anne Judson, John Comenius, or Tu Iron? These are all men and women who, driven by their deep Christian faith, have had a hand in transforming this world. Freedom, religious liberty, justice, healthcare, education, the sanctity of life, women's rights, the emancipation of slaves, the environment, even animal welfare, which most people probably would think has nothing to do with Christianity, are all, as we understand them today, because of Christianity, transformed for the better by Christianity. Now, we might agree with that intuitively. We might be familiar with some of the issues and arguments, but the book, How Christianity Transformed the World by Dr. Sharon James, gives us so much more. With her customary forensic attention to detail, she weaves insightful personal stories with history into a perceptive, engaging, and particularly in these days, important theological narrative. I'm also privileged to have Sharon as a colleague, and I'm delighted that she can be with me today. Thanks for joining me, Sharon. I know you're very busy.
Great to be with you, Ciarán. Thank you very much.
Now, Sharon, your new book is already on sale. It was based on some seminars that you delivered at Word Alive in 2019, and I was in the audience then, in fact. What is it about this issue that has driven you to speak and write about it, and why now?
Well, when we think about compassion and justice and freedom, we all assume that these are really good things, really important things. But it's important to say, where do those ideals come from? And of course, I passionately believe, as you do, that those ideals, which we all hold dear, are actually based on the biblical belief that all human life has dignity and every person, whoever they are, should be respected because everyone has been made in the image of God. And so that Christian foundation lies behind the things that many people value, whether or not they are Christian today.
But of course, I mean, many today, as I sort of alluded to in my introduction, they regard Christianity as rather a repressive influence, don't they? And they'll happily ignore the atrocities carried out under state atheism and talk about the Crusades or the Inquisition. And these days, there's also this idea that the church is anti-women and anti-LGBT. So what would you say to that argument?
I totally would say that it's true that in the name of Christianity, in the past, sometimes tragically, injustices have been perpetrated. Of course, we say that the truth of God's common grace, the fact that everyone has been made in the image of God, means that Christians don't have a monopoly of virtue and compassion. But when you've said all of that, the big picture is that we do have a really good story to tell, and we don't have to be ashamed of the story that we have. The big picture is that since the inception of the Christian church at Pentecost, the followers of Jesus Christ have lived out that biblical command to love God by loving neighbour. And that's had an immeasurably positive impact on human history. And the other hard reality is that where states have denied the existence of God historically, those states, as you've already alluded, have actually been at the top of the rank for tyranny and dictatorship and the abuse of human rights.
Well, that's a really good overview. If we could sort of delve into the content of the book just a little bit more. I mean, obviously we can't go into a whole host of detail, but perhaps you could just take us through some of the major themes of your book.
Yeah. Well, if we take the first 3 centuries of the Christian church, I think that perhaps uncovers some of those major themes altogether. In, say, the year AD 40, there were probably only a few thousand Christians. If you fast forward to AD 350, just 300 years later, one sociologist, Rodney Stark, reckons that there might have been 33 million Christians by that time. And he says, why that extraordinary growth, even in the face of fierce opposition and hostility? Well, one factor he suggests was the Christian regard for the sanctity of all human life. And he also points to the Christian morality and ethics, because at that time in the Greco-Roman world, out of a total population of about 70 million, probably a tenth of them at any one time, 10 million, were slaves. And the reality was that the elite of freemen could then use women, children, young people, slaves for their own sexual gratification. And that created a vast ocean of human suffering and exploitation and abuse. And as always, women and children suffered most. And so the Christian ethic of sexual purity, the Christian ethic which was equal between men and women, compassion for the needy, all of that was vastly attractive in a world of such misery and brutality and need. And he says that the Christian communities freely offered love and compassion and care in a culture that widely thought that compassion was a weak thing and a pitiful thing. The idea was if a poor person could no longer work, they should probably be left to die. Compassion was a very Christian thing.
Do you think there's a tendency these days to kind of look back to that time as some sort of golden age of philosophy and goodness and righteousness that actually isn't borne out by the reality, the historical reality?
Yeah, life for the many was very, very brutal. I mean, clearly the philosophers achieved great things, and there's a wonderful classical tradition in many ways that we can learn from and applaud, and we should not forget. But there was very much an elite mentality that education and rights were for free people and for men. And the Christian communities offered a community of love and care that said that everybody equally is made in the image of God. And there should be that sense of fellowship and friendship between people, which was quite unique at the time. And if I just stick on that point of compassion for a little bit, the early church had the protocol, the understanding that churches should provide education for orphans and help for widows, and churches kept supplies of food and firewood for the destitute. And then, of course, when Constantine became emperor, the church became the first, as it were, public welfare organization in history. So that sort of encompasses some of those themes of dignity of human life, protection of life, and compassion. And for example, even now, all over the world, many Christians might recite the Nicene Creed. And we rightly applaud the Nicene Creed. It affirms the foundational truth that our Lord Jesus Christ is truly God, truly man. What many people forget is that that same Council of Nicaea in AD 325 ordered that a hospital should be built in every town where there was a cathedral. Thus establishing the principle Jesus cared for the sick, he cared for the needy, his followers should do the same. And that's why some people say that the parable of the Good Samaritan is actually the parable that changed human history.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you're a historian and writing at this from a Christian perspective, but you're not on your own in this thinking, are you, about the impact of Christianity? Because we haven't got time to get into it, but of course Tom Holland, who's very secular, recognised in his book Dominion the impact that Christianity has had on the world as well.
Absolutely, and he's not the only one. Yeah. I mean, you've got people like Douglas Murray, who's written very well on that. That sociologist I mentioned, Rodney Stark, and others. And so I think one of the reasons I wrote my little short book is that I'm very aware that many people don't have time or energy to read all the long books. And I wanted to digest some of this really good thought that's been contributed, not just by Christians, but by secular writers, and digest it into an easily accessible format for people who maybe have a shorter time to spend on reading.
Yeah, Dominion is quite a tome.
It
isn't
is.
it?
It is.
But people listening and watching might think that we're in danger of saying that it's only Christianity who made any difference. Can we just address that point briefly?
Yeah, just to address that, we believe that the God of justice, the God of compassion, the God of love has created all human beings in his own image and hardwired into us an awareness of his moral law. And that's why non-Christians can show extraordinary altruism and compassion and do much good. And we would say we believe that is because although they don't recognize it or acknowledge it, they have been made in the image of God. So I say again, as I said at the beginning, Christians don't have a monopoly of virtue or compassion, but the Christian ethic says that it is obligatory for those who profess to follow Jesus to love our neighbours and indeed love our enemies. And if you look at the teaching of the New Testament, Christianity is about believing the right things, but it's also about having the right experience, love for God, love for neighbour, feelings, and it's about doing the right things. Faith without works is dead, says the Apostle James. And so there's that obligation on Christians to do good to others. And the biblical teaching is that if we fail to do that, we have to call the reality of our profession into question.
And I've got to say, it's one of the excellent things about your book is that it is not just a history book. I mean, it draws on a lot of historical fact, but it seems to me anyway to drive the Christian reader towards recognizing that we shouldn't be shrinking violets in the public square, that there is this legacy of being involved right back from the very beginning and throughout history. You connect history very much to a current theological drive for Christians, if I can put it that way.
Well, I love biography and I love reading the lives of real people. And what we find when we look at these real people is that they were driven by, yes, a deep love for God, but also a really deep love and compassion for the people around them. And I loved finding out about people that I had never heard of, but they were evidently driven by that passion. I mean, I think of a Welsh clergyman, Ciarán, called Thomas Jones. Now, Thomas Jones was actually thrown out of his parish in Wales in 1785 because he'd been converted. He was converted to real living Christianity, and his parishioners were embarrassed by his enthusiasm. But anyway, eventually he became curate of a very tiny hamlet in Northamptonshire. I think there were about 46 houses there. And he had a pitiful stipend of £25 a year, which even then was very small. But he stuck in that humble place for 43 years, and he transformed the surrounding community simply out of love for those around him. He started schools. He built 6 almshouses for elderly widows. He founded clothing societies to help those who were destitute. He founded an educational society which helped 50 people enter Christian ministry and much more. So this was a man who, just out of love for Jesus and love for other people, did what he could in that humble area. And I was just so inspired by reading of people like that, that wherever we are, however ordinary it may seem, we can do our bit.
But again, one of the interesting things about your book is that it doesn't it shows how global. So the examples that you give shows how global the impact of Christianity has been. That it didn't just transform Europe or the West, as the title says, it transformed the world. And you bring in accounts from Southeast Asia and China and elsewhere that shows the influence of Christianity and how Christianity made a difference in those places, not just Europe, not just America.
Yeah, I found that so exciting. Some people say that Christianity truly is the first really global religion. And of course, at the moment, the church is growing most rapidly in areas completely away from the West. And I'd love to just pick up a few examples of the stories that really inspired me. So if you think of India, there are many, many Christians in India who are working really hard to liberate those who are trapped, particularly in sex slavery. And so if you think of the great city of Mumbai, there's a red light district there, and the Dignity Network, which is a Christian organization, gives several stories of people whose lives have been transformed. I'll just mention little Bindya. She was born in that red light district, and tragically her mum died of HIV, and her prospects just seemed so grim. But she was taken to a Christian rehabilitation centre, and she has done so well at school. And by age 15, she was top of her class, and she had every prospect for a really good life far away from that red light district. And her life was transformed for the better by the Christian gospel.
Wonderful.
Or moving even further, we all know that North Korea is perhaps, sadly, the least free country on earth. And the government exerts such a terrible totalitarian control through a network of concentration camps. And many North Koreans try to escape, and some escape over the border into China. And in China, the interesting thing is they're told, look for the cross, even if they have no idea what that means. Because in China, even though Christians there are facing, many of them, severe pressure from authorities, many of them risk so much by helping refugees from North Korea, many of whom have never even heard of Christianity. But these people are rescued and helped. And so, yes, you mentioned in the introduction, Tu Erong, he's a Chinese Christian who was imprisoned for 20 years for his role in helping North Koreans escape.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
It's just unbelievable. But they run those risks because they're passionate about the biblical belief that every human being has been made in the image of God and therefore should enjoy freedom. Just so inspiring, Ciarán.
Well, we'd love to talk about this for a lot longer, but let me leave you with one final question, if I may. Is if there was one thing that you would want someone who's reading your book to take away from it at the end, what would that thing be?
Well, I think just the positive truth that Christianity really is good news. I mean, you said at the start, there are so many myths around. One myth is that, for example, they say Christianity has been bad news for women, and nothing could be further from the truth. Christians through history have insisted that girls as well as boys should have education. And yes, I mentioned another example coming from India where in-depth research was done surveying women in a slum called Butler slum, and it found that women who converted to Christianity had a new sense of hope and dignity. They had confidence to speak out against abuse, confident to work well, to support their families. The Christian gospel gave them dignity and it gave them hope. And so, yes, I've been inspired by stories of just ordinary people who have found hope in Christ. And I think in a world today where so many are fearful, so many are wondering what the prospects are for the future, it's that belief that the Christian message offers hope, and it's the basis for freedom and dignity. And we don't have to be ashamed of the Lord Jesus Christ, even though there is so much hostility to the Christian message in our culture today.
Well, Sharon, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been fascinating. I'd like to have spent a lot more time speaking about this with you. Well, How Christianity Transformed the World goes on sale this Friday, the 5th of March, from Christian Focus Publications, priced $7.99. My copy is already in the post. Thanks for watching, and thanks to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Ciarán.